So Mark, I want to start at the early days. You're a 13-year-old boy and you're working with your father at the Vic Market. Tell us about that experience, what you learnt and how those times sort of shaped your life today.
I guess it's one of those ones in reflection. You know, as you get older, you sort of look back with a great level of fondness as to those experiences. At 13, I was probably thinking, you know, this is hard work. Why am I having to come to the market so early in the morning and help Dad? And, you know, I don't want to be doing this. I want to be sort of sleeping or, you know, going to the footy like the rest of my friends. But as it evolved over time, and I was selling sort of between 13, 14 through to about 21 years of age at the Vic Market, it really sort of harnessed a skill set of, I feel, being able to deal with rejection. You've got people constantly stopping at the stall. You've got a product, you want to sell them. They've got a limited attention span in terms of how long they want to stay at the stall before continuing to walk on. So you kind of got a 2 or 3 minute opportunity to close. And, you know, when you go that hard at closing, you're going to get rejected a lot. And it became like a second nature just to get rejected, which has certainly helped in the game of real estate.
And so you've gone from selling Ugg boots to selling properties. Tell us about that transition. How did you get into property? My
mum was doing a lot of work with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and she ran the Bayside branch, and the meetings used to be at our house in East Brighton, I think every second Thursday. And one of the volunteers was the receptionist at Colliers International at the time, a lady named Kathy Tranchina, who we still keep in regular contact with. I'd come home from a friend's sleepover on a Sunday morning on the 64 tram up Hawthorn Road in East Brighton, and I was walking home and I saw my first auction just by sheer luck. And as it turned out, the auctioneer was Philip Kingston from Gary Pier, who is without doubt the finest auctioneer, in my opinion, in Melbourne in the residential space. I watched Philip do his thing and I thought, wow, I want to be him. He had a green Range Rover, he was making the crowd laugh. I went inside to Mum. I said, I've worked out what I want to do, I want to be in real estate. And she said, well, you better run it past your dad when he comes home. And that led to Dad basically saying, I don't want you to do residential real estate, do corporate real estate, which he sort of meant commercial real estate. So sort of from there, the connection with Kathy from Make-A-Wish led me to get work experience at Colliers International, which I'm extremely grateful for even to this day. At that point, I met John Marasco, you know, an incredible operator in our industry and, you know, has really stood the test of time. And I met another gentleman, Martin O'Sullivan, at the time. Did work experience, loved it, took all the IMs home, a little bit like a footballer, you know, carrying his football everywhere. I was a bit of a sicko. You know, I was carrying the IM for 140 William Street, which was owned by AMP at the time that Colliers was selling, and I just carried this book everywhere with me. Yep. So it was a little bit innate. Fast forward maybe 5 years, and Pat Burke, who's you know, in the industry as an agent with MP Burke Commercial, he was at Colliers. He called me. I'll never forget it. I was at the market on a Thursday. The phone call came through, 9629 8888, which was their number at the time. I'm not sure if it still is. Never been so nervous and excited at the same time. And Pat basically offered me a job to sell strata offices with him.
Wow. And at what age were you there?
21.
21 there. Yeah. And so then you joined CBRE, I think, back in 2006. Tell us about that transition from Colliers to CBRE. Yeah,
it was a really big decision. I needed to rely on my father's vision and my father's judgment because I was so young. I loved the environment at Colliers. I'd learned a lot from John Marasco in particular, from guys like Nick Rathgaber, you know, who were there at the time, yep. Who's, you know, Nick's gone on to do amazing things with his career. Tony Iliano, you know, I was a 21-year-old sitting amongst these superstars and had access to them, and I was just, you know, like a sponge. I just wanted to learn. I probably annoyed the hell out of them by just asking question after question, but they were, you know, good enough to support me. During that period of when I was there, I was infatuated with Martin O'Sullivan. He was a really quiet guy. He would do some of the biggest deals, you know, that I saw at the time. You know, I remember we'd have weekly minutes where we sit down and go through all the properties as a sales team, and I'd be saying, oh, I just sold Strata office suite at Normanby Chambers for $96,000. The fee's $1,100, and I'd be all excited. And Martin would come in for 2 minutes and he'd say, oh, I just sold 222 Exhibition Street, 620 million, the fee's 3.2 million, can I go now? And he had this, you know, incredible style of how he did things, and I just wanted to get in with him.
Absolutely.
You know, and I remember him saying to me one of the first times that I went over to him, and obviously annoyed him. He said, "Mark, let me teach you something in life. God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them appropriately."
Listen more than you talk.
That was the only thing he said for the first 3 months, and so I ended up forming quite a strong friendship with him. He got an offer to move to CBRE. He basically asked me to come with him. He gave me 24 hours, to make the call. I went home that night. I didn't want to go. I really am, quite loyal to those that give opportunity and very loyal to those, that also provide you with the opportunity. But my dad just felt that it was a good idea to move. And he felt that if I went with Martin in the marketplace, they'd see that as a real big vote of confidence in me. The rest is history.
And so when you joined CBRE, how different was it from what you were doing at Colliers in terms of the processes, but also the properties you were selling and the divisions you were working with?
It was probably a little bit similar. I would say that CBs back then were more institutionally focused than potentially a little bit more of the balance that we've got now. So CBRE, I think it might have even been CB Richard Ellis back then, they were very focused on that top end of the market, in terms of office leasing for GPT and AMP and, the big landlords, very active in industrial, institutional market back then, and then obviously in the office market. I was always quite interested in the private market. I felt that was where we could have the biggest impact, and really one thing sort of just led to another. So it was the same sort of focus starting in the CBD. I was doing CBD sales when I was at Colliers, and we just sort of started to build those divisions within CBRE over time.
And then tell us about your rise. So this is 06 when you first joined. Tell us sort of about the rise through the years and how you came to be where you are today.
The business within CBRE started to do really well in about 2012. That was kind of the first breakout year, but there is kind of this black hole gap of about 5 years before where, we weren't doing obviously as well as what we had done, 2012 onwards, but we were working pretty hard in the background. When I joined the company, there was a fellow by the name of Sebastian Drapak, who was an assistant at the time to Mark Costa. And he was sort of in the wrong role and he wasn't enjoying it. And I knew that I had some listings coming up, Chevron Retail in particular down near the Alfred Hospital, and also Hero Retail at the bottom of Nonda Katsalides building in Little Collins Street. And I had no support, I had no staff to work with, I had no teammates, and there was Sebastian. Martin came in because he was recruited to run the division at the time, and he said they want to get rid of Sebastian. They don't know what role he's playing here. What do you think? I said, well, mate, give me a week, because if he's any good, I'll need him. Anyway, it turned out that Sebastian, was a gun. And, without his efforts, in the first 3 or 4 years of me moving to CBRE, there's no way that either myself or the current team would have anywhere near the platform that we've got today. So really, Sebastian and I sort of went after it, set up a lot of systems, a lot of processes. We were getting our asses kicked in the market. Back then, Knight Frank, were absolutely flying. They had a really strong operator at the time. We would wake up in fear every Saturday morning as to what listings we'd missed out on. And it was a difficult time, because we didn't have stock, we weren't making sales, there wasn't that adrenaline and momentum, but we were building infrastructure.
And how do you go, so say you're second, third or fourth in the market, how do you go from being sort of an outsider to becoming number one? How does that work? Is it the team? Is it the resources you put in place? You mentioned infrastructure. Tell us a little bit more about that. Well,
I guess it's just momentum. I often say to the team that the most valuable thing in a estate agency, irrespective of what product you're selling, is momentum. We're in a perception business, so we don't necessarily have a product to sell. If I have a pen and I want to sell 1,000 of the pens and I'm in the pen business and I want to move them quickly, I can discount the price by 30% and get rid of the stock. In what we're doing, we're selling a skill, we're selling a feeling, we're selling a service. So it was never we set out, we want to be number one, this is why we want to be number one, this is how we can. It's really just putting one foot in front of the other, having a real focus on possibility mindset and not capping yourself. But what you learn definitely as you get older as well is timing is so critical. The value in timing, if you're building, an agency career in your 20s, when you don't have kids, you don't have a wife, you can dedicate so much time to it. And you find yourself lost in a trance at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, having just, uploaded 100 contacts to a database, and you're not thinking, well, I've got to get home to read to my kid or, to catch up with my wife So, I would just say for anyone out there, that follows this sort of podcast in a guidance role with nephews or nieces or kids or young people watching, don't underestimate the value in working really hard through your early to late 20s. Because I'm a big believer, especially in agency, that's when you can set up your career.
And you mentioned timing there. I read somewhere, I think you yourself and one of your colleagues were one of the first to sort of go over to China in the early years and drum up relationships and contacts. Tell us about why you saw the opportunity in China.
It's that one foot in front of the other. So a quick funny story, my mobile phone on billboards, 2008, start seeing this trend of people ringing that can't speak English. And obviously worked out pretty quickly they were from Asia, and then worked out they were speaking Mandarin, Chinese, but I couldn't service them, because they literally did not speak a word of English, and they'd be talking to you on the phone thinking that you understood what they were saying, but there was just this massive disconnect. So I walked around the office, we were in Rialto back then, and I was looking for someone that could potentially speak Chinese. And over in the corner in the valuations department was Lewis Tong. It's just amazing how these things can work out. I went over to Lewis, I introduced myself, I had a buyer on the phone, and I said, can you speak to this person? Can you see if you can understand what they're saying? And Lewis just took to it like a duck to water.
Wow.
And that was the start of the business relationship, which has seen us go all around Asia together. I think we've transacted just under 10 billion to Asian capital in our time together. We've been working together for 10 years, have an extremely close relationship. Obviously both best men, at each other's weddings, and, just an incredible journey, with him, over that time. And he now runs our Asian services team. His brother Kevin, who's a younger version, runs our shopping centre team focused on Chinese buyers, and it's just worked out to be a wonderful story.
And how important do you think relationships are with Chinese buyers or just with any buyers or vendors that you meet? How critical is establishing a good relationship and then keeping contact going and getting to know them personally as well as through their business dealings? How important do you think that is?
I guess it goes beyond just, a business transaction. I think the word relationship is overused and a little bit misunderstood in the agency world. A relationship's not building up rapport 2 weeks before a potential listing and then, working on that friendship during the campaign, then selling the property and then not speaking to them again. It's a little bit of a wider discussion in terms of what you want to stand for as an individual. Again, as you get older and you cover off on your basic needs, when you're young, you set out, you want to make a name for yourself, you want to be able to afford certain things, you want to attain a certain lifestyle, which is all, linked back to your purpose and your drive. 20s, late 20s, you're not really thinking about the feelings of other people, and the effect of your behaviour and what that could have on other people. But as you get older, you start to build more awareness around that. And you realise that, most people wake up, almost 99% of the population would wake up each morning and set out to do their best for the day. And people's bests are going to be different based on their circumstances, their environment, their capabilities, their capacity. So the ability to show compassion, the ability to have understanding for people's circumstances and the fact that they are having a crack and they are trying their best. And although that might not be, your view of what the best should be, at no point should you sort of turn around and say, well, it's not good enough. You need to understand the person, and that's what links back into relationships, understanding who you're dealing with, understanding what their situation is. The right advice may be don't sell the property. That sounds like a really weird concept, talking to a real estate agent that's linked to listing and getting a commission.
Yeah.
But you've got to stand for something, if you want to be a great operator. And if you can read the situation, if you can see that there's pitfalls for them actually selling the property, or they're under enormous duress because something's just happened in their family and they might not be thinking rationally and they might be thinking of letting go a really great asset, quite often we will say, the group will say, look, have you considered actually refinancing? Have you considered doing this? Have you considered, speaking to a tenant about extending the lease to make it a little bit more secure?
Yeah.
And that sort of attitude comes back, to reward you in spades. And I think that's relationship.
And turning to the market now, how have you seen Melbourne change over the past decade in terms of obviously the cycles that it's gone through, the assets that you're taking to market, but also, I guess, how the industry's professionalised as well in terms of marketing of properties and that sort of thing?
I'm always at conflict because when I'm driving around, like I'm sure yourself and your viewers are, you're noticing more and more infrastructure works going on pretty much anywhere you are around Melbourne. Obviously, a lot of that's upgrading capacity for higher density projects in the suburbs like an Elwood or Elstonwick and you're sort of sitting there and you're in traffic, you're like, what's going on here? How come this can't get done quicker? And then you sort of think to yourself, oh, gee, I've sold 6 sites in the area. I'm probably a little bit to blame for this, so you can't sort of get too annoyed. So I think what we've seen is, just a massive emergence of medium to high density projects. I think that's giving people opportunity to improve their lifestyle, whether it's in places like Bayside or the inner north, which I'm a massive advocate for. I still think properties around there are so undervalued when you look at it on a like-for-like basis. But medium and high density is giving people a chance to, live a lifestyle that maybe they weren't able to 20 or 30 years ago, where they may have been forced to move further out from the city centre, from the major attractions, in order to either lease, property or get into the property market. In terms of the professionalism in the industry, I think that we're going in a great direction as an industry. I go to a lot of events. I talk to a lot of, especially the younger people in the industry coming through, not just within my team at CBs, but I like to keep an eye on things generally out there. And the standards are improving all the time. The commercial agent's ability to follow up, to think strategically, to present properties in a creative nature, to think, through what they're doing, the way they're presenting themselves, to talk with data and analytics. It's come a very long way. And within our own team, I'd certainly like to take credit for that, but I've been very fortunate to surround myself with some incredibly gifted operators, who I'm still lucky to have alongside me today, or I'm alongside them. But, guys like Lewis, guys like Josh Ruttman, Justin Dowers, Julian White, Louise Teal. I mean, they're an incredibly driven group of people who just continually set the standards and the bar higher and higher. The work that we've done with Nose to Tail, for example, Jason Suter and his team, that's a 10-year partnership. With our marketing agency. We've transformed our business from a print media, sort of hard copy. We still do an element of it, but we're easily the most digital of the big agencies right now within a subsector of CBRE.
So Mark, you mentioned team there. How do you've got a team of how many in the team now? 37
at the moment.
37. So what characteristics or qualities do you look for when you are building a team?
Yeah, it's definitely the most challenging part, of what we do. It's interesting, I was having a chat last night with Josh Ruttman. We went for a listing and unfortunately on that occasion we missed out, and we often talk about how we can learn more from our losses rather than the wins. We were just having a conversation about the mechanics of real estate agency and how over a 30 or 40, 50 year period it's very much focused on high performing individuals. It tends to attract a certain personality where people want to take more for themselves, not necessarily build something around them. You start to see in residential these little pods of teams, but very rarely do you see, a group of 30 or 40 people, all pushing in the one direction. And we were talking last night, about how what we're doing to build this team goes against the grain of the natural instincts of good agents, which is to focus more on yourself as opposed to focusing, on building the team. And every day we're sort of fighting that natural instinct that attracted us to the industry, in the first place. And you don't need to look too far to see the superstar agents. We've got one of them obviously at CBRE in Simon Rooney, the most dominant commercial property agent that Australia's ever seen. Incredible operator. And although he hasn't built a wide team over the years, that's not to say that the team model is any better or worse than the individual model. It's just that the industry's been filled with more the individual models than the team. So circling back there, it's certainly been the most challenging part of what I do, but equally, without doubt, the most rewarding. So the elation, the highs that I get from watching the group go about trying to achieve something and then get the reward for effort has given me far more satisfaction than the best deal that I've ever done.
Wow.
It's an incredible feeling. You know, even last week, last Friday, we sold 2 blocks of flats in East Melbourne. The team was really invested in the result and the process. The vendor was someone they really wanted to deliver for. It wasn't a perfect auction. We ended up having to slog it out after the auction and sell. And then as I was walking away from the auction, go back to my car to go home for the weekend, I saw the team do a huddle, you know, the sales team. And I know it sounds a little bit sort of maybe weird for some of the viewers, and it's only real estate, and I understand that, but to watch that group of salespeople, including the operations team and the marketing team, do a quick, you know, high five, I mean, it just gives you a different perspective to the industry.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think when you're in that mindset, you get to have incredible experiences with your teammates, partners, their families. People, you know, come up to you. I get the benefit of parents writing to me. You know, for some of the younger team members, they write to me and say, you know, I appreciate you doing this with my son or with my daughter. And I think that sort of, for me, that really fuels the passion to keep going. I'm not sure if the team, you know, if we didn't have this team set up, you know, I'm not sure how long I would have stayed at this in terms of, you know, if it was just a single agent, because it gets pretty boring celebrating by yourself.
And so 37 people in the team, it's obviously a big mouth to feed. How have you seen this year play out compared to other years?
It's been challenging. I mean, there's really the three big pillars which hit all at once. And someone quite smart said to me a few weeks ago, it's great they hit all at once rather than them hitting sort of over a 3-year period, which is sort of like going and getting a root canal, you know, and just, so the three were obviously the pending federal election. Yep. If you reverse back 3 months, people forget we had a state election in the last quarter of 2018. So that obviously has an impact on the local Victorian market. Into a federal election where people were predicting a massive change in government, Shorten, you know, in and the Liberals out, didn't eventuate. Royal Commission into finance, huge. Mm-hmm. You know, if I've learnt one thing about, you know, commercial property, it's driven by debt. You know, that's not a bad thing, that's just a leverage play. But debt is so important to our industry to keep it moving. So Royal Commission froze that. And then obviously the one that, you know, certainly hurt our business a lot was the increased Chinese capital controls. So the inability for Chinese nationals to bring money out of the country to purchase commercial properties in Australia. The impact of those three things in the first 4 months, were crippling to the business and got us off to a really slow start. But thankfully, if we look at the last 6 months, and in particular the last 60 days, we've transacted 59 properties in that 60-day period. And I've gotten very much on the front foot to the team saying we need to have a strong plan in place for early 2020, because I think the market's going to come back really strong, really early into the new year. And
in what sectors in particular do you think still in that development space of residential, or do you think it'll be more office and commercial product? Obviously
office and commercial, and then industrial, which is a market that I don't know anything about, but the boys are on fire and the girls are on fire at CB's at the moment in terms of the deals they're doing in industrial, so that's clearly a really strong marketplace at present. Commercial office has been going very well in terms of leasing and investment sales. Retail is in a bit of a hybrid, single tenant product like Bunnings, warehouses in incredible demand, yet big shopping centres are going through a bit of a transition, but there's definitely capital and definitely buyers. The market that I'm most hoping to see improvement in is the development side sector. I recently gave an interview in the lead up to the Caltex portfolio, which we just transacted for 137 mil, the largest development site portfolio transaction in 2019, completed about 2 weeks ago. If we use that as an indicator, and what I said in the lead up to those properties going onto the market is that we need supply. You know, the supply is really drying up for a number of reasons, and all it's going to do is impact the everyday Australian or the everyday Victorian. rents are going to go up. They're going to become more expensive. People are going to be spending more of their wage on rents, less on their lifestyle, less on experiences, which is not good for the economy. And the price to get into your own property is going to go up. There's still going to be people out there that can afford to buy property, but it's going to push the average entry price for either first-time or second-time buyers up quite dramatically. So I recently put a post out, onto LinkedIn. I was spending some time with my wife and son Harold at the Royal Exhibition Gardens. There was an expo on last Sunday, and I hadn't been there. I hadn't spent much time there. And I'm sort of wheeling the pram, and I'm seeing all these people eating gelati, having picnics, having an incredible time, like it was buzzing. It's a nice day. And then I saw in the background Jeff Shue's tower, the Vic 1 tower, and a few of those big buildings in the northern precinct of the CBD. And I put on the post, attention state government, this is why people want to live in Melbourne. This is why we need to get on the front foot and get supply into the market. People want to live, they want to rent, they want to buy, investors want to buy, and I really think we're at a point in the market where we need intervention, and the development sector needs to be given a shot of confidence through policy, through changes in the financing, of projects and the consumer financing of apartments and townhouses. And we need to start moving, before we get the effect of what undersupply can bring to a market.
Speaking of LinkedIn, you made a post several weeks back between the link of residential clearance rates and how that affects sentiment. Can you tell us a little bit more about that link and what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting train of thought that I've had for a while now. If I go back to when my career started, no one talked about clearance rates. Auctions occurred on a Saturday or a Sunday, and they were just never talked about. And then I'm not sure what it was, but probably 2 or 3 years ago, it started to become a part of the social fabric. So you'd go out, for lunch on Sunday, and your friends would be saying, "Oh, did you see the clearance rate?" "Yeah, I live in Bentley." They might say, "I live in Bentley. I noticed that 80% of the houses sold." And so it started to seep into the social fabric, and then it became also a big part of mainstream media. So it was reported in the early general news of The Age, whereas it might have previously been in the business section. Obviously Domain and the website started to report it heavily. And then the pinnacle of what capped off my thinking was I was watching the Channel 9 News maybe 10 weeks ago, and there was a live cross to someone on behalf of Domain to update the viewers of the Channel 9 News on the clearance rates for the day. And that started me thinking about confidence and sentiment. And, it's only natural that if you own a house, it doesn't matter whether it's $500,000 or $5 million, if you go to work on a Monday morning and you know that 90% of the similar houses that you own, or similar houses to what you own, have sold at auction, I think you're going to feel pretty good about yourself. You're going to feel good about your family. You're going to feel positive about the direction that you're heading in. You know that your house is in demand. You know that your biggest asset most likely is a liquid product. If you did decide you wanted to downsize or upsize or move overseas or whatever it might be, that there is someone to buy your house. Now, in contrast, when the clearance rates were 50%, you had 5 Australian couples on a Saturday night go to bed thinking, well, we've just auctioned our house and we haven't had a bid, or we've just auctioned our house and it hasn't sold. The effect on their behaviour as consumers the next day, needless to say, they wouldn't be going out spending $25 on smashed avocado and feta toast. So it's all about sentiment. The commercial property market, in particular development site market, residential market, it is about sentiment. And the more confidence that people can have, the general public can have, I think the more impact it's going to have in a positive way on the market.
And given that clearance rates have been sort of in the 70s and 80s in the last couple of 2 or 3 months, I guess that correlates with what you guys are seeing with the 59 sales in 60 days. Yeah,
I think that's a really astute point. And it would really make sense when we start to look at the trends and this concept of the clearance rate having an effect. There's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the clearance rate will have direct correlation on the confidence of developers buying either suburban or CBD sites. The issue at the moment is there are a lot of confident developers out there that can read the tea leaves, similar to how we've discussed this morning, but there's still such blockers in place for them to act. You know, whether it is this lack of incentive for stamp duty. I mean, why would any apartment buyer buy off the plan at the moment? It defies logic. It makes no sense whatsoever. They'll wait for a builder to build it, which in Australia we know for any projects over 50 apartments isn't going to happen because the financing is so regulated. The banks need certain type of interest cover. Yes, you can go to a non-traditional lender, but you're going to be charged, you know, potentially an arm and a leg to do so, which affects the margin. And development's a risky business at times. So developers do deserve to get their 18, 19, 20+% margins because it is risky. A lot can go wrong. You know, so I feel for developers at present because you look at that stamp duty situation, you look at the foreign stamp duty surcharge, which defies logic. Why we feel that we should be slugging overseas buyers with that sort of impost when they can go to America and be incentivised to buy there, they can go to Canada, they can go to England and be incentivised to buy there is beyond me. Then we look at the financing side. You know, we need to work with the big four banks to get them mobile again. You know, they need to be assisting developers and apartment and townhouse buyers get into the market. And then obviously the Chinese capital controls, which is one that's dear to our hearts, but one that I don't think anyone in Australia can have an impact on changing. So that would only be cream on the cake, so to speak. But there are three key things there, you know, that I think as an industry we can help educate and influence government, and that will get our sector moving again, which is, you know, going to need to happen to avoid this undersupply, you know, which is on the cards at present.
So Mark, you touched on a couple of the challenges and issues that developers are facing. On the flip side of that, what opportunities are there for developers in the marketplace at the moment?
Yeah, I'd say that, you know, there's some of the best opportunities that I've seen over the past 5 or 6 years. You know, obviously as the market got hotter for development sites, there was less supply. It effectively drove prices up. It became very much a vendor's market, you know, as opposed to a buyer's market. If anything, at the moment, it's probably 50-50. You know, there's some incredible sites out there that developers can get their hands on. I think the terms in which the vendors are willing to accept, be it deposit structures, be it settlement structures, are a lot more favourable than what we saw in those heady years of 15, 16, 17, you know, where it was cash 60-day, 90-day settlements. That's the price, take it or leave it. And because the market was so strong, developers were taking it. That's come off a fair way, you know, and yeah, I think you only have to sort of go onto the internet to see that there is a fair bit of choice at the moment. And the smart developers that are reading the play and that are understanding the structural challenges that are going to face the industry in terms of undersupply, they're buying up. You know, they might not be splashing their name all over the newspaper and hearing about this, but the activity behind the scenes from the sophisticated developers, the ones that have been in it 10, 20, 30 years, is painting a very positive story. That will translate into more mainstream deal activity. You know, one example at the moment would certainly be the very obvious sell down from corporate Australia. So if you use Caltex as an example, they identified 25 properties which they were running petrol stations on, which no longer met their expectations in terms of profit. But these were all 2,500 square metre sites, all on corners, all in wonderful locations. They all are going to be remediated into development sites, and, you know, Oliver Hume, for example, have come and picked up 11 of those sites. Now they're going to build medium density projects, mixed use, retail, residential, hotels, student accommodation, build to rent. There's so many options out there for developers at the moment. And when a corporate decides to sell, you know, commercial real estate, quite often they're willing to meet the market on whatever the market's best terms are. So all I would be saying to developers out there is, it's really clear what's going to happen from my perspective in Melbourne, and there's a lot smarter people than me that you can rely on for their opinions as well. But you can see that most of the cranes in the skylines are now relating to commercial office projects. Yep. So we're in a massive upswing of commercial office supply, we're in a massive downswing of residential supply, yet we've got all of these people still coming to Melbourne. We've got people from regional Victoria that aspire to live in suburban Melbourne or in the CBD. So you can see that there's going to be great opportunities for for developers that get themselves set with a site now with the view of delivering it somewhere between the next 15 and 30 months. You know, and I'd just be saying to developers out there, work closely with your agents, preferably with CBRE and the listings that we've got, you know, coming from Development Ready and you know, your site. But ultimately, you know, work with your agents, get offers in on properties, and see what deals, you know, can be done out there for you.
So, in your experience, you obviously deal with, you know, developers day in, day out. Who are the developers that you really rate in terms of strategy and their model and their processes?
There's a lot of great developers obviously out there. There's some that, you know, are under the radar more than others, who are doing some incredible things. You know, I think Michael Piccolo, for example, and the work that he produces is first class, you know, whether you look at Carlton or Elwood, but you probably don't see his name in the newspaper as much as others. I've had the benefit of growing up, I guess, in the industry with certain key players. You know, I think what Joe Russo's done at Caden, you know, is arguably one of the best stories in Australia, you know, in terms of the development sector. I remember selling Joe his first big site on behalf of Vision Australia in High Street, Paran.
Yep.
I think it was called Trilogy. You know, he did 3 buildings, and you know, from there we ended up doing a whole raft of deals. But I think you watch his skill set evolve over time, and he's now doing large-scale mixed-use projects like in Moonee Ponds. He's obviously just built a hotel on the corner of Queen Street and Flinders Street. So to go from, you know, doing 15 or 20 apartments to some of the biggest projects in Melbourne, really in the space of a decade, you know, is really a phenomenal outcome. I love, you know, groups like Pace. You know, I think Shane Wilkinson is, without doubt, one of the most talented developers that I've come across, and businessmen. He's disciplined, you know, down to a T. He's very careful on his acquisition, you know, what he buys and what he pays for it, and just always looking to improve his business and evolve his business. You can't go past the Central Equity. You know, we talk about them a lot in our team in terms of their focus and their discipline and how they stick to the knitting, their humility, you know, and really what they've achieved. You know, I think they've built more units quite easily than anyone, you know, in Victoria, arguably potentially combined.
Yep.
You know, and they were onto it, you know, really early. And I guess, you know, one other that I've grown to have enormous respect for, you know, over the years is Tim Gurner. You know, I think he represents the younger brigade, but his work ethic and his passion for the industry is like no other. You know, he has a vision, he backs himself, he works his backside off. And some of the deals that he's been able to pull off, I mean, I don't think the industry appreciates how special what he's been able to do in St Kilda at St Moritz really is. Yeah. You know, if we look at all of the challenges in the industry over the past 6, 8, 12, 18 months, you know, he's gotten a significant amount of stock away there. There are all the doubters that said he wouldn't be able to do it, that said, you know, he's too ambitious, and that are willing to sort of throw a bit of mud at him. But he just uses that mud to fuel his desire, which then fuels his work ethic. And now you see, you know, a demolished Novotel Hotel, Kremer obviously appointed as a builder, and he's getting on with it. You know, and we need more people like that in our industry, because every time you drive past that site, you're not going to see Tim there now. You're going to see 300 or 400 site workers, you know, male and female. You're going to see people holding slow signs and stop signs and guiding trucks and all these very valuable jobs, you know, to get a building up out of the ground, but, you know, effectively providing livelihood for Australian people. You know, and I think the development industry is way too maligned by the general public. Yes, they're in it to make money, but equally, it's not making money at no risk. They're not robbing, you know, they're not going into a bank and just taking money off a, you know, teller and walking out. Yeah. You know, they're having to work for it. And as I said before in the interview, if that means they get a 18, 19, 20% plus return, you know, I think all power to them.
And these developers that you are working with, how have you seen their sort of preferences change when they are looking to acquire sites that might have looked at traditional media in the past, now they're looking at digital media? What sort of platforms are they looking at, and where's the inquiry being driven from?
I believe in the industry, in terms of developers, the workforce is getting younger.
Yeah.
You know, so we're constantly dealing with acquisition managers that might be in their, you know, mid-20s to mid-30s. I just think about this really logically. Go back 2 generations, people in that position, either the developer themselves or a right or left-hand sort of person, buys the newspaper, goes and has a coffee down in Hampton, looks at all the sites in the newspaper and rings the agent. How much is that one? You know, what will the vendor accept for that? I think now people are taking their iPads, you know, and if they're not taking their iPads, they've got a big iPhone where they can basically pull it out of their pocket and search. And, you know, I think a true testament to the success of the business that you guys are running is that you've identified a niche in the market that actually enhances the experience for your customer and in turn, I guess, our buyer. You know, they don't need to scroll through pages and pages of, you know, newspaper articles, or they don't need to look at, you know, industrial investments in Truganina. They want to buy a development site, they go onto your site and they see the listings. You know, the challenge for us is making sure that we're listing the best properties and therefore we're getting the most inquiry. But, you know, I think that the gap that you guys have been able to pick in the market has been really well received by your clients, you know, the developers in essence. And as a byproduct of that, our clients, being the owners of the land, are continually recognising that they just can't afford to market their development site without having an allocation in their budget going to development ready. And it's really as simple as that.
And we've covered off on a lot this morning. One final one. What's the future look like for yourself?
You know, I think as an ambitious person, you know, you're always thinking about whether you're operating to your full capacity. You know, for the time being, you know, I take my responsibilities at CBRE extremely seriously. Their responsibilities to, first and foremost, our team. You know, you put people on, you give them a position, they bank on being able to get their cheque every month, they go out and buy a house, you know, pay a mortgage and want to improve their life. So every opportunity we get to list a property, you know, is an opportunity to deliver for the customer that we're acting for, but it's also an opportunity to help protect our team. Obviously the stakeholders within CBRE, you know, the different layers of management and ultimately the shareholders, you know, is something that, you know, they've invested a lot in my career. They've invested a lot, you know, with our team. You know, we've got a wonderful partnership where both sides of that partnership really deliver for each other. So, you know, for the foreseeable future, I'm extremely motivated, engaged, you know, at improving my skills as an agent, at improving my skills as a leader for our team, and most importantly, delivering, you know, on promises that get made to vendors that entrust you to sell their property, that entrust you with $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 worth of marketing to market their property. That's not something that I take lightly, and you know, I just take it on a campaign by campaign basis, and you know, we try and do our best to get the results.
Well, mate, you're still young, many years ahead. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good on you. Well done.
Thank you.